black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
One of the worst ones is the disrespect for who we are. I mean, whereas people are able to operate in their own self-interest when they know and appreciate who they are, one of the things that slavery robbed us of was the ability to understand who it is that we were. We didn't know anything about our ancient history. We didn't know that we were the people who came from the Nile Valley civilization, the great builders of ancient civilizations. We didn't know that long before the captivity of slavery, we were in fact the pioneers in human civilization. And by not knowing that, we therefore have always had to look to other people as images of our possibility, as role models, and did not believe that somehow to be a black bald-headed man or to be a black nappy-headed woman could be dignified, could be beautiful, could be intelligent, that there was genius in who we were. Not that we were better than any other human beings, but we didn't even realize that we were just as good as any other human beings on this planet. And struggling with that self-esteem, struggling with that issue of simply learning to love ourselves as being comparable to any other human beings on the planet is one of the biggest psychological problems that we've had to deal with.
Okay. And obviously we haven't done a very good job, in your opinion.
Well, I think
we're struggling with it.
I think we're still struggling with it.
Okay.
I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress, but I think that it's still a part of the basic kind of vulnerability we have. We spend a lot of time, even now, trying to alter our appearance so we can look other than ourselves. We still do not think of ourselves as being geniuses. We think we could be good entertainers or outstanding athletes, but we don't believe that we could be thinkers. We don't believe we could be philosophers. We don't believe we can be great healers. We don't understand those aspects of our human capability. One of the wonderful things about the recent election of Barack Obama is that it began to shock people that a black man could be president. Because we didn't realize that for thousands of years before our captivity, we ran our own civilizations. And therefore, we didn't even try to do those things. And therefore, we spent a lot of time trying to be other than ourselves. That's a problem. That's a real problem, because when you do that, you begin to resent people who are somehow trying to represent for you what your possibilities are. And the old crabs in the basket mentality, where you tear each other down. You think you're better than I am, or I'm better than you are, or I'm better than you are because I've been accepted by somebody other than my own mother, father, and my own community. And when someone stood up and said, I want what's good for you, we resented that.
Exactly.
Because we didn't understand that people could have our self-interest at heart.
Which is a difficult thing for us, because not only do we end up in a self-destructive behavior, which we'll let you talk to in just a moment,
yes,
but others help to cater to that self-destruction within us when, as you mentioned, they don't see us as being people who are trying to be better than who we are.
Absolutely.
We're trying to grow from that.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Emoji Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. I'd like to welcome you to this discussion that I'm having today. As always, I try to start with books and introduce the audience to a lot of the books that I read, that I bring topics to this show every a month. This one, I want to have a discussion with you out there. And I want to talk about the As you've seen from the video clip that I had played before I came on, it was a clip of a great psychologist named Dr. Naeem Akbar. Some of you have heard of him. Many of you may not have, but he has been around since, I've been following him since the early 90s. And he's always focused on the psychology of the people, that how we as black people are functioning today. I want to discuss the effects of enslavement and Jim Crow on the psychology of black people today, and that's what this next two shows are going to be about. How are we dealing with it? We might figure that we're doing normal things, but inculcated in the culture. You see, the culture is the way a people transmit the psychology of a people, the way DNA transmit the biology of a people. You know, it's sent down the generations. And even though we are in the 21st century, 24 years into the 21st century, people think that what happened 200 years ago does not affect us today. And I'm saying no. Here's a book that I introduced a couple of years ago, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. This sister, Dr. Joy DeGruy, said no. The person that you saw in the video clip, this is one of many of his books. He says, know thyself. But one thing we don't talk about is the psychology of us as a people. I also threw in one of the books of Voices from Slave Narratives. We think, again, our psychology is passed on to us by the culture. And there's certain things in the culture that came out of a desperation to survive hundreds of years of trauma. There's certain behavioral patterns that are still in our culture today that we don't know is survival things, that the way we talk to ourselves, the crab in the barrel aspect of within our community, the way we're still not united in many things, where other groups come together culturally, we seem to be separated. You know, we're like a shattered diamond, strong individually, but still shattered. And I have some talking points that I want to share with you. I'm going to do it in a slide presentation, and then we'll just have this talk that you need to have at the dinner table with your friends in study groups. You know, we need to have these discussions, okay? And I want to start with some of the talking points that I think is very important and needs to be discussed, and we'll do it here in the Emoji Circle within the next show. So I want to start out with this point. No people ignorant of their past can ever function normally in our society. How many of you could tell me anything historically other than 1619, that we came as enslaved people? Those are the ancestors that we start with in 1619. And some of know some inventors and this things, and we only think of those ancestors. The great Dr. John Henry Clark said, whenever we start at 1619 is a mistake, because everything after that, it seemed to be progress. But you see, those ancestors that came off that ship, the White Line, on the shores of Point Comfort in 1619, had ancestors too. And they had ideas. They were doctors, they were lawyers, they were soldiers, they were mothers and fathers. They were our ancestors. They weren't the Negroes and the coloreds that later on was put on them by those who traumatized them from 1619, and the trauma still goes on today. So let's go on to the next point I want to show. You see, the psychology of a people is drawn from their unique historical experience. And if the history of another group is imposed on your group and your unique historical experience is ignored, problems will occur. Do we have problems as black people in this country? Yes, we do. Could we go back in the past and historically know why we got to this point? No, none of us cannot do that, because many of us do not read. We think that what's going on today is real. No, it has a history. It has a precedent. And if you don't understand that precedent, you won't understand how the situation we're in today came manifest. It's only when a people have knowledge of a common origin, a common objective, a common condition that creates the psychology of unity. Like I said, the psychology of people is set culturally down the generations the way DNA is sent biologically down the generations, okay? So we all, Dr. Akbar, the person in the video, once said that, that always stuck with me, we all carry the minds of those who came before us. Let's remember that. Let's go on to the next one. There's something that distinguished us from other groups in this time and in this space in America, and that was a deliberate distortion of our character that took place during slavery. We're not Negroes. We're not the N-word, okay? We're not B's and H's like we constantly push in some of our music. Look at the language that we use, okay? And for those of you who might tell me, well, that happened back then. I'm not have nothing to do with slavery. No, again, we all carry the mind of those that came before us. And if those ancestors who had the mind to survive those traumas passed down some of that behavioral pattern to survive that are still inculcated in us, how we talk to each other. In fact, we're using language that doesn't belong to us. This English was forced on us, and the way we express the English in the Ebonics way is something that we had developed through enslavement, which showed the brilliance of us as a people, but it was not who we were. We were not the Igbo that was on that ship. We were not the Akan that was on that ship. We were not the Angolans that were on those ships that came here from Africa, who had culture, who had languages, who had festivals, who had religions, who had ways of expressing themselves in the world. And we have to have this conversation. If you don't understand the past, who you are being now is a construct, and this is a construct. We're regurgitating the language of those who oppress us and who traumatized us. It was trauma. Okay, that's what this sister was talking about in this book. Let's go on to the next one. Let's have this discussion. There's not a more crucial issue that confronts us as Black people in terms of freeing ourselves than the understanding of the psychological impact and continued influence of 246 years of enslavement. That's 1619 to 1865, and another 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. That's 346 years of consistent trauma, people. The 64 Civil Rights Act was just in 1964 to today. That's less than my lifetime, okay? I was still alive. I was alive when 64. But what are we dealing with since 64 to this very day? Racism, which is the stepchild of segregation and enslavement and the trauma that goes with it. We are traumatized people. Yes, we are shattered diamond. Diamonds are strong. We're still here. Somehow we're still doctors and lawyers, but the family structures and the trauma that many of us are still dealing with from generation of family issues is a reflection of what was going on to our ancestors and our people. Some of us turned to drugs. Some of us turned to alcohol. Some of us became abusive. Trauma manifests itself in many different ways. When you're a Black man and you can't get a job and you're called a boy, when you're a Black woman and you're raped constantly, and I'm saying there's a book here that I got and that I want the camera to focus on to tell you about the trauma. This book right here that I have, it talks about the slave farms where Black women were just like what's going on today in Kentucky with horses being bred in America. in the land of the free. There were slave farms outside of Richmond and Maryland Eastern Shore, all along that area where they produced babies and sold them. Like you would sell a horse, breeder would sell a horse or a foal. This is trauma. You think Sally Hemings, as an enslaved young teenager, could say no to Thomas Jefferson? We have to understand that trauma and sustained trauma is what we've had to deal with, not for months, not for years, not for decades, but hundreds of years. And the fact that we're still here and strong shows our strength as a people, but we have to deal with the traumas that we still exist, that infiltrated. You had to develop certain behavioral patterns to survive slavery. There's a way you had to talk to your master. There's a way you had to protect your children by making sure a brilliant black child would not get the notice of your slave master, so you got to denigrate him in front of the, oh, he's just a stupid kid, or she's just dumb, knowing that she's brilliant. But that child is hearing their own mother saying they don't understand their situation and the environment that they're in. They had to survive. And some of those behavioral patterns were still put into our culture and moved down the timeline, generation after generation of trauma. It's not who we are, but we are a traumatized people, and we got to understand that. Let's go on to the next one. Again, the psychology of a people, this is what I'm focusing on, is drawn from their unique historical experience. Okay, all the other groups that came in, whether they came poor to Ellis Island, they didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, or they came from some other group, they still came as a culture. Their culture wasn't devastated. They still had a way of combining and joining. Like I said, common objective. They had this common, that formed unity. No people can be given a new and different path and function normally. Who were we taught in the schools that existed? All I heard was Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, and nobody looked like me when I was coming up, okay? I'm a 1950s baby, and I did not hear these things. Okay, we're still having issues about teaching Black history lessons today, and DEI and all these other things that all groups have normally. But why is it a problem when Black people will know their true and accurate history of who they are? It affects your psychology, and those who are in power that against that are still the type of people that had problems with our ancestors and abused our ancestors, and they're still doing it to you today. And if you don't understand the history and you accept what's going on and the damage that's being done to us psychologically without knowing, it's just like the frog in the pot that the heat is slowly boiling, but the frog doesn't move. It just allows itself to get slowly cooked. And our psychology is still being cooked, people. Let's go on to the next one. We look at the etiology. The etiology just means you look for the causes, the etiology of a disease, or the etiology of a way of people are functioning today, okay? Of contemporary behavior on multiple generational trauma. That's what we're dealing with. One such group looked like, again, they did it for other groups, and I'm going to show you with this point. One such group looked at are the multi-generational family members of the Jewish Holocaust victims. Multi-generational Native American family members were also studied by these American psychologists. Japanese American internment survivors were looked at to see what happened with the trauma they dealt with during a particular period of time in history. But when it came to the looking at the multiple generational effect of enslavement and Jim Crow segregation on Black people, there's always a visceral and cognitive dissonance form of pushback from white America when that topic is brought up. Why is that? When we talk about our history, when we talk about enslavement, why we got to go back to that. But you'll talk about the Jewish people, brothers and sisters, talk about what went on in those concentration camps. Native Americans talk about what happened at Wounded Knee, or what happened with the multiple treaties that they signed, and America did not. Their culture still deals with that because that's the foundation of how they function today. Okay, we're still talking about the Japanese internment survivors. We still talk about those things and the traumas. But when they freed us, did they deal with the trauma of 246 years? 100 years of segregation, apartheid added on. Don't you think that had trauma to people of African descent? Why are we not allowed to talk about this? Why is America not facing that? Okay, let's go on to the next. Okay, and again, as I said, and why? The fact is that the psychological researchers knew when they did these studies on the Japanese, when they did these studies on Native Americans traumatized by putting them on reservation, when they did these studies on the generational effect to the Jewish population of the Holocaust survivors, that due to the psychological trauma placed on these populations, there's still the residual mental and emotional impact found on that long-time traumatized group of people. And they're talking about the Japanese, the Native people, and the Jewish brothers and sisters. Every day we hear and in movies about the trauma, okay? The effect of what's going on in Gaza and in Israel today is based on that trauma. But where is the studies of generational issues of black people, of people of African descent? Where is it? That is my question. That should be your question. Let's go on to the next one. This is the person whose book that I have here, Dr. Joy DeGruy, who came up with this concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome. Dr. Joy DeGruy, she did a 6-year research on the effects of 246 years of enslavement and another 100 years of apartheid in America that had on the black population. There are black scholars. When I said nobody, I should qualify that. I say white America, okay, the establishment, okay, but we in our governing structure, that's the social structure. Okay, in Africana studies, there's a social structure. Those are who are we to them, and then there's the governance structure. Who are we to each other? Okay, those are two different structures that we constantly go between when we talk to each other and when we go out into the world and talk to white America. There's a whole different psychology that we switch. That's what Du Bois talked, the dual consciousness. Now, this is the governance structure that I'm coming from, where we do have Dr. Naeem Akbar, who was in the video clip. We have this sister, Dr. Joy DeGruy. We have brothers like Wade Nobles and these black scholars and psychologists that are who dealing with this, but they're not being funded a lot. And a lot of you don't even know that they exist. They're not going on when we have these racial issues. Those are not the people that are brought on the news cast. When you see the social structure try to talk about the problems that on race, we need to talk to these scholars, our black scholars who's dedicated their life to this, like Dr. Joy and her book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Just like PTSD is affecting soldiers that come from battle, what you think black enslaved people were traumatized? Do you think they would suffer from PTSD in the 1800s, in the 1700s, on those slave ships going through the doors of no return when you were kidnapped from your family and sent to a totally alien country? The women were raped, the men were emasculated, okay? In Roots, he said he was Kunta Kinte. They whipped him into submission to say, I'm Toby, okay? That's trauma. When men are lynched, that's trauma. When women are raped, That's trauma. When babies are sold, look at your child today. If you have a 6-year-old or 5-year-old, or you have a daughter who just started menses, okay, and can have babies, and she's sold, or master takes her, or they have a process called prima nocte, first night. If you're a husband, if you're an enslaved husband, do you know this something came from Europe when the serfs and the noblemen on that land, just like on the plantation, had the right to take the wife before the husband, because they didn't really allow slaves to marry. Prima nocte, first night. How you think that would make you feel as a man, as an enslaved man? The trauma, the horror of your wife being taken by a master because he owns her. That's what we have to deal with. Okay, I got maybe for one more, and then I'll stop and we'll go on to part 2. This is what Dr. Joy found. What she found was that there was a clear connection between the survival behavior created to survive the traumatic experience of enslavement and today's contemporary living in African American experiences. She started to see the type of negative behavior we all take for granted about African Americans today as simply part of the trauma of 400 years of enslavement. And I'm gonna leave it right there. Think about this. You know, since the 20 enslaved people were brought to those shores in 1619 at Point Comfort, like I said, black people, those ancestors who had ancestors, who are Africans, we are the descendants of those Africans. We deny that. That's trauma. If you don't know who you are, know thyself. That's what Dr. Akbar said. And I want you to understand, knowing thyself and facing the trauma will heal you, will heal our people. But we'll continue this discussion on the next show. So until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye. And to the power of our ancestors.